Some of you are experiencing harassment that is so intense, it is beyond belief. Not everybody is experiencing the same level of harassment, and we're going to talk about it. All-encompassing, wherever you go, waiting for you before you get there harassment is a reality for a lot of targeted individuals. You might be this person out there who's dealing with all the facets of gangstalking, covert poisonings, covert druggings, break-ins, workplace harassment, voice of God technology, directed energy weapons, street theater, gaslighting. The whole thing is on your plate. And you know that telling anybody or trying to explain it to anyone is literally impossible. It is unexplainable. It's beyond logistical possibilities in the world that we understand, or at least that we think we understand. And, that's just the way it is. There are a lot of people, who experience that. And they may have even, been selected for different things, even from childhood. And they're on, targeted individual marathon trek. And they just don't know what to do. It's very intense, and it's a very lonely road. At the end of the day, targeted individuals just have to hold their ground. And sometimes thinking about this stuff is the last thing you want to do, but it is inevitable. And awareness is crucial. And so when you do start thinking about it, it's a good idea to try to be productive. And there are 3 areas that targeted individuals inevitably have to look into. It's technology, the spiritual dimension, and psychology. And, targets, that are experiencing that higher level of harassment, well, they're usually watched and profiled a long time before they're aware that they're being hunted. A lot of times cameras will be installed in their dwelling, in their vehicles. Their phones are going to be hacked. Their phones are going to be tapped if they're the landline. They're going to have, people looking into their past, infiltrating their social circle, getting into their work environment. And, a lot of the street theater, that shock and awe that comes at the targeted individual, comes out of activity like that, depending on what you're dealing with. And we're going to get into, how the spiritual dimension affects that as well, because I think they go together. I do, because I think a lot of target individuals are dealing with things that are set up in advance, and that's one of the most perplexing, dilemmas that target individuals deal with when they run into something, that seems to involve foreknowledge. But we're going to stick to technology right now. And we know the government has experimented on people in a lot of different ways. They've tested biological weapons, chemical weapons, nuclear fallout, chemtrails, you name it. I think a lot of targeted individuals are worried about implants. And I think that's something that they have to deal with. I've ran into, some incidences that I don't know what to think. Okay? And, there's always the possibility that targeted individuals are being led to believe that they have implants. Okay, there's that possibility. But, I think that, from what I've seen, something is going on there. Okay, when you've got a lump that appears and, is emitting radio, frequencies, RF radiation, and then all of a sudden you wake up in the morning or whatever, and you've got, a literal wound in that area and it's gone after, maybe, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I've seen that kind of thing, and that's pretty freaky. I don't know what to think about it. There's people that have speculated in a lot of different areas on that, and I wouldn't put it past the government. I'm sure after seeing all the stuff that, even the limited things that we know about that they've done, They're definitely playing around with that kind of thing. And, even the voice of God technology, they've had that for quite a while. So I'm pretty sure they've been driving people crazy with it for some time. And all the other things that they're using as far as directed energy weapons. And, there's probably things that we don't know about. That's scary. And, there's a lot of people, who believe that they are being followed. Okay, and surveillance can go into that area as well. And, there's always the possibility that people are being sensitized too. Because I've heard of people, it's almost the old classic methodology where cars are following them or whatever. And I don't know. That's kind of old school. Helicopters would be too. I would imagine that if people are dealing with that it's more likely they're being sensitized. I would envision something like this fella right here, with, Zoom capability, telescopic capability, monitoring people maybe from a high distance where they wouldn't even know, that anything was even there. And then of course, you're dealing with the possibility of, the interaction between, an implant and something. And also, you're dealing with satellites and stuff like that. And the smaller drones, well, they had ideas about that stuff back in the early 90s where they even, had, things that were speculatively like little insects that could fly into ductwork and get into buildings. And it was supposedly, for anti-terrorism and stuff, but whatever. They always end up using it on citizens. So, if you are one of those people who suspect you're being followed or whatever, especially if you're in a vehicle, you're probably dealing with, tracking devices, and things like that. If you're getting rid of your phone or whatever and you're going somewhere and people are showing up. But then there's always the possibility of, the spiritual dimension interacting with you as well. And like I said before, when you're dealing with that, you are dealing with something that involves foreknowledge. And that gets into quantum physics and time dilation, and you're dealing with, at the very least, the fourth dimension. Okay? And, a lot of targeted individuals are attacked in that way. They're attacked, and, it's almost, like this stuff was set up before they got there, whatever they're dealing with, because that's where the logistical, problems come into play. Okay, because if you got a team of people, even with very sophisticated equipment, they're not going to be able to predict what hotel you're going to, what stores you're going to go into, especially if you don't even know. And I've talked about that before. When a target goes on the run, and they like that. They like it for a reason too, by the way. They love it. And it's almost like they know where you're going. And that's kind of what we're going to get into, because when you're dealing with the spiritual dimension, the theory is that you have the past, the present and the future all pretty much, simultaneous. I think it's called like block theory. But, you have, for instance, you have the velocity and gravity, but really it's more perspective. So in other words, the problem that comes into play with the whole thing is you have entropy and the collection of data over time that moves, linear into the future and accumulates. And, if all these things are, existing simultaneously, then that, for a lot of people that creates a problem, but not really, because, if you have, different dimensions, right, then what you're dealing with is completely possible right there, because you have that, ability to have that leeway and to play around and, in the future. You can kind of see what's going on, or you can, interact with things that we can't in our little three-dimensional time space, reality that we live in. And I had a comment from one of the viewers, about the recruitment of people into this type of program. And, they got to be careful because they don't want to recruit the wrong, person because they're going to mess it up or they would talk or whatever. I think that the likelihood of somebody doing that if they knew all these things would be pretty low because they'd be too scared. But I don't think they need that. I think they can compartmentalize this stuff, and I think it has to do with what I was just talking about, okay? Because rather than to think that people are clairvoyant or whatever, or that they know what you're thinking or whatever, a lot of the time, I think that people are influenced. I've talked about how the spiritual dimension can affect people. We have all kinds of examples in the Bible that have to do with people being under the control of the spiritual dimension. Some people call it possession, demonization, oppression, and then you also have things that have to do with foreknowledge, okay, which goes into the same area in Philippi that prophetess was predicting the future and had all those people in that area convinced that she was clairvoyant. And then when, Paul cast out the demon after being harassed for 3 days, well, she didn't have that ability anymore, right? So, theoretically, if you were dealing with a spiritual entity that was, dimensional, because, nobody saw anything come out. When you're dealing with something like that, you're not dealing with something that you can see. Okay, it's not like we can see these things walking around. We can't because they're dimensional. And so they have a different perspective. And with that type of knowledge, from that dimension, fourth dimension, or however you want to look at it, they can have that. And they can affect people. And, just like that girl in Philippi, well, they can kind of turn that stuff on and off, right? And so people don't really have to know. And a lot of people get paranoid and they're like, I wonder if people can read my mind or whatever. How are all these things working? And I don't think it works like that. I think some people do have partial knowledge, but I think they're like puppets. And it creates that shock and awe that targeted individuals deal with, whether they are, experiencing that situation where they go to a hotel room or whatever, and it almost seems pre-wired, or they get into a rental or whatever, or they run into a situation, or they are, hit with street theater that seems to, be clairvoyant. The people with foreknowledge and so forth, a lot of people that deal with the occult are dealing with that stuff, and that goes into secret societies as well. And that's that hidden knowledge and wisdom and all that stuff goes back. And that's the interaction between people and the spirit, the spiritual dimension. That's what it is. That's how it happens. And I think that's probably all it is. Okay, and then you're dealing with the realm of psychology. A lot of targeted individuals, they're going into the area where they're being controlled and manipulated. And then you got the other stuff where people are just kind of being destroyed. They're being taken into condemnation. They're being gaslighted and condemned and just worn down. And, because, when you get into MK Ultra, you're dealing with things that had to do with, turning someone into a Manchurian candidate, controlling them. Instilling information in part of one of their personalities, and triggering that with things that they've been sensitized to or hypnosis, and having someone who you can control without them knowing it, right? And I think that, the whole idea, in my opinion, came from people who are affected spiritually. Because, the spirit world can control people in that way. Mankind has to use technology and drugs and everything. So I think that's probably what they were trying to do, and they got that idea. And there are people out there who believe they're in some kind of a, behavioral modification program. And I don't know. It could be more to do with experimentation when it comes to them. And then there's other people who are just being taken out. Guys, be good to yourselves. Be safe.